She stopped on her way to work when she saw a blind man sitting by the roadside. Hungry, tired, and forgotten by the world, she bought him food and fed him with her own hands. But that small act of kindness made her late for work, and her boss's company fired her without asking why. Weeks later, the same billionaire who owned that company would come searching for her, not to punish her, but to make things right. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you believe that kindness still matters. The morning sun drifted softly through the thin curtains of Liz's small apartment, drawing gold lines across her face. Her phone rested in her hand, the screen still lit from the night before. She had fallen asleep scrolling through old messages, the kind that once made her heart flutter, but now only deepened the ache she tried to hide. Her thumb lingered over a familiar name, Tunde. The chat was filled with memories, sweet good mornings, inside jokes, late-night promises about forever. She opened one. "We'll build our home soon, Liz. Just trust me." She smiled faintly, but her eyes watered. That was before everything changed, before love became something she feared to touch. The ticking of her father's old wall clock echoed in the quiet room. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the same rhythm that played the night her world fell apart. Her mind wandered, uninvited, back to that evening. The table had been neatly set, jollof rice steaming in a covered dish, fried plantain arranged like petals, candles flickering gently. Liz had even ironed her best dress. The one Tunde said made her look like peace itself. She waited by the window, humming softly, checking her phone every few minutes. When his car finally pulled up, she ran to the door, her face lighting up. But the look on his wasn't the same. Tunde's shoulders slumped. His eyes refused to meet hers. He walked in slowly, as if the weight of the air had doubled. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice low. He dropped his car keys on the table and took a deep breath. "Liz, we need to talk." Her heart froze. Those 4 words always came before something broke. "What's wrong?" she whispered. He rubbed his palms together. "I can't do this anymore." She blinked, confused. "Do what?" "This, us." The candle flames wavered. Her body went still. "Tunde, what are you saying?" He began pacing. "You've been nothing but good to me. Too good. And that's the problem." "The problem?" "Yes," he said, his tone trembling between guilt and frustration. "You're too perfect, Liz. Too kind, too forgiving. You make me feel like I'm not enough. Every time I'm around you, I feel like I'm failing some invisible test." She tried to smile, though her lips shook. "Tunde, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you." He looked away. "That's the thing. I can't live like this anymore. You'll always deserve better." Her voice cracked. "Better? You're the one I prayed for." He sighed deeply, grabbed his jacket, and said softly, "Then maybe you prayed too much." The door closed behind him before she could move. The sound echoed through the small apartment, louder than any thunder. The flash of that night faded as Liz blinked back to the present. Her room felt smaller now, but the pain had turned quieter. Not gone, just buried under layers of acceptance. She stood up slowly, walked to the mirror, and looked at herself. Her reflection was calm. The tears had dried, leaving only the faint trace of a strong woman trying to rebuild herself from the inside. "Be strong, Liz," she whispered. "You've survived worse." On her table sat a small, framed photograph of her late father. His eyes were kind, his smile the same one she inherited. He used to tell her, "Kindness is expensive, my daughter, but spend it anyway." She touched the frame and smiled faintly. "I'm still spending it, Papa." The city outside began to wake. Car horns, traders shouting, children laughing on their way to school. Liz picked up her handbag and her folder of documents. A new day was waiting, and she had made herself a promise long ago. She would never let heartbreak make her bitter. She tied her scarf, adjusted her blouse, and walked to the door. The morning light hit her face, warm, hopeful, clean. Her life might not be perfect, but her peace was still intact, and somewhere far across the city, another soul, one buried in luxury but starving for meaning, was about to begin the same morning in a different kind of loneliness. Neither of them knew that their stories were already walking toward each other. Liz closed her door gently and stepped into the noise of Lagos streets, her heart still tender but alive. The world had called her too perfect, but someday someone would see that her softness was not weakness. It was strength, and that person's life would never be the same again. The city was already wide awake by the time Cosmos Ballea stepped out of his penthouse elevator. A grey drizzle swept across Lagos, the kind that blurred glass and made even skyscrapers look tired. His driver held the door open, but Cosmos waved him off. He preferred to drive alone lately. Inside the car, soft jazz played, a habit he'd kept from happier days, but the music only deepened the quiet. He rested one hand on the steering wheel, watching the traffic crawl below the bridge, people rushing through puddles while he sat, surrounded by leather and silence. That contrast used to make him proud. Now it only reminded him how far he'd drifted from ordinary life. At 34, Cosmos was already one of Nigeria's youngest billionaires. Every newspaper wrote about his business empire, his sharp instincts, his power. But no one wrote about the emptiness that began 3 years ago. The night love turned into a lesson he never wanted. It came back to him often, uninvited, like a film stuck on replay. The engagement dinner had been perfect. Champagne glasses clinked, violins filled the room, and Amara, his fiancée, glowed in silver lace. They were the couple everyone envied. He had built a company from dust. She had stood beside him through late nights and negotiations. At least, that's what he believed. 2 nights before the wedding, Cosmos returned to his office after a late meeting. He wanted to pick up the vows he'd written by hand, a sentimental thing he rarely admitted. The building was dark, except for a thin line of light under his office door. He smiled, thinking his assistant was finishing work, but when he opened the door, his smile died. Amara was there, not alone. Richard, his business partner and closest friend, stood beside her. They both froze. Richard's tie was loose. Her perfume filled the air. Cosmos didn't shout. He didn't ask questions. He simply looked at them, eyes steady, voice hollow. "How long?" Amara started crying. "Cosmos, please, it's not what you think." He glanced at Richard. "How long?" Richard swallowed hard. "A few months." The words hit harder than any bullet could. Cosmos placed the folder on the table, removed the ring from his pocket, and set it down between them. It rolled once, metallic, final. "You can both leave," he said quietly. No rage, no threats, just the kind of calm that comes when something inside a man shuts off forever. They left in silence, and he stood there alone until the office lights flickered out. Outside, the city kept glowing, as if mocking him. From that night, he stopped believing in the word forever. Rain tapped against his windshield now, snapping him back to the present. He sighed, starting the engine. Work was all he had left that still made sense. Numbers never lied. People did. By the time he reached Ballea Holdings, the drizzle had stopped. Employees straightened nervously as he walked in, his expression unreadable. They whispered his name the way people whisper thunder, with respect and fear. He stepped into his office, tall windows behind him overlooking the island. On his desk lay stacks of reports waiting for approval, each stamped, signed, perfect. He skimmed them mechanically. Everything was precise, efficient, cold, just the way he liked it. He didn't notice how much life had drained out of the place since he stopped smiling. At lunch, his assistant asked, "Sir, will you be attending the staff appreciation dinner this weekend?" "No," he replied without looking up. "Cancel it. Send their bonuses instead." Money was easier than presents. Presents required emotion, and emotion was expensive. When evening came, the sun broke briefly through the clouds, painting the city in gold. Cosmo stood by the window, glass in hand, watching the light move across rooftops. For a fleeting second, he envied the street vendors laughing below, free people with nothing to lose. He wondered what it felt like to live without pretending. He set the glass down and returned to his desk. Work. Always work. If he stayed busy enough, maybe he'd forget the sound of Amara's voice or the ring spinning across his table. But deep inside, beneath layers of success and control, a question kept echoing. Will I ever feel anything real again? He didn't know that the answer was already walking somewhere across the city, a young woman named Liz, still healing from her own heartbreak, still believing in kindness. Their paths hadn't crossed yet, but fate was quietly stitching the distance between them. Two hearts, broken in different worlds, heading unknowingly toward the same morning, the same test, the same redemption. And when they finally met, everything that once hurt would start to make sense. Morning crept softly across Lagos, the sky still pale from the night rain. Liz stepped out of her small gate with a brown folder tucked under her arm. Inside were her resumes and certificates, her ticket to a better life, if only one door would open. She had promised herself one more week. If nothing comes, I'll start my own little business. Today, she had 3 offices to visit: a logistics firm in Surulere, a supermarket chain hiring a cashier, and a company on the island whose name she'd only seen on a job board. People said its owner was rich and strict, but Liz no longer cared who signed her pay. She just needed a chance. At the junction, a newspaper boy called out, "Auntie Liz?" "Another interview?" She smiled faintly. "Yes, oh, maybe today is my day." The boy laughed and waved as she boarded a bus heading toward Victoria Island. Inside the bus, heat and noise mingled. Conductors shouting, gospel songs humming from someone's phone. Liz held the folder tightly on her lap and stared through the window. The city flashed by like scenes from a restless film. Markets, billboards, school children, distant towers wrapped in mist. She thought of Tunda, but the ache was dull now, almost tender. He had left saying she was too perfect. For months she'd believed it was her fault for loving too much. But that morning, as the bus bumped across the bridge, she whispered to herself, maybe being good isn't the problem. Maybe he just didn't know what to do with it. The lagoon shimmered beneath the bridge, sunlight glancing off the water. Liz drew a quiet breath and whispered, "Lord, let my effort meet mercy today." By late afternoon, she was tired. The first office had smiled politely and said, "We'll get back to you." The second one had already chosen someone else. At the third, the receptionist didn't even look up from her phone before saying, "Position filled. Try again next time." Each rejection stung less than the last, but drained her all the same. She walked to the bus stop, folder clutched against her chest, telling herself she wouldn't cry. The traffic crawled. Vendors knocked on windows, selling water and plantain chips. The air was thick with exhaust and frustration. Liz leaned her head against the window pane, eyes half closed, listening to the city breathe around her. By the time she reached home, dusk had fallen. The corridor of her compound was quiet except for a baby crying somewhere behind thin walls. She unlocked her door, set the folder on the table, and sank into the small sofa. Her phone buzzed once, a notification sound she almost ignored, but the subject line made her sit up straight. Invitation for interview. Cosmos Holdings Limited. For a moment, she just stared at it, unsure if it was real. Then she opened it. The message was short, formal, perfect English. Dear Miss Liz, you are invited for an interview for the position of junior accountant at Cosmos Holdings. Venue, head office, Victoria Island. Time, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Her hand flew to her mouth. Tomorrow, she whispered, heart racing. She scrolled again to be sure. It was real, the same company she'd seen on the job board, the one she thought was far beyond her reach. Tears welled quietly. Thank you, God, she breathed. Just one chance. That's all I needed. She turned on the single bulb above her head and began to iron her blouse. The sound of the iron gliding across fabric mixed with the soft hum of crickets outside. Her mind replayed the day, all the doors that closed, only for a greater one to open. When she finally lay down, the folder rested beside her on the bed. She couldn't sleep, but for the first time in months, she didn't mind. Hope had finally knocked. Morning light flashed across the glass towers of Victoria Island, turning the skyline into gold. The city was already alive, cars honking, men in suits rushing through revolving doors, women balancing takeaway coffee cups and files. In the middle of it all stood Cosmos Holdings, tall and intimidating, the kind of building people slowed down to look at. Liz stood across the road, clutching her brown folder, staring up at the mirrored glass that reflected the sky. She'd seen pictures of big companies before, but nothing prepared her for this. Don't panic, she whispered to herself, crossing the road. You deserve to be here. Inside, the air smelled of polish and ambition. The reception glowed with white lights and soft music. Liz gave her name to the lady at the desk. Good morning. I'm here for the accounting interview. The receptionist checked the list. Yes. Take the elevator to the third floor. Conference room B. Liz thanked her and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, her heart thudded like a drum. She closed her eyes briefly, remembering her father's words. When you walk into any room, walk with peace, not fear. When the elevator opened, she found a hallway lined with glass doors and people walking briskly in suits. A young man pointed her toward conference room B. She entered quietly. About 20 candidates were already seated. Some were reviewing notes, others fidgeting nervously. The room hummed with tension. Moments later, a woman in a fitted red jacket walked in. Mrs. Necker, the human resource manager. Her perfume filled the air before her voice did. Good morning, everyone, she said sharply. We'll begin the written test shortly. Phones off, papers face down, until I say so. Her heels clicked as she walked between rows, scanning faces. When her eyes landed on Liz, her expression softened just for a moment, then stiffened. She noticed the simplicity of Liz's clothes, the calmness in her posture. Something about her felt too composed, too confident for someone who didn't belong to the city's elite. The test began. Pencils scratched, calculators clicked. Liz's fingers moved fast but steady. Numbers had always been her safe language. No lies, No noise, just truth. An hour later, the papers were collected. Mrs. Necker flipped through them as she walked back to her desk. Her eyes paused on one sheet. Clean handwriting, perfect calculations. It was Liz's. Her smile faded. By late afternoon, only a few candidates remained, including Liz. The HR assistant walked in, holding a short list. "Ma, results are ready." Mrs. Necker scanned the paper and froze. At the top, bold and clear. Liz. Her jaw tightened. She had already promised this position to her friend's niece. She forced a smile and said to the group, "Thank you for your time. The successful candidates will be contacted by mail." Liz left the room quietly, her heart uncertain. She had done her best. Maybe that was enough. But the next morning, her phone beeped. Subject, appointment letter, Cosmos Holdings. She gasped, covering her mouth. She read it twice to be sure. She'd been hired. When she arrived to sign her documents later that day, Mrs. Necker greeted her with a smile too sweet to be sincere. "Congratulations, Miss Liz," she said. "Welcome to Cosmos Holdings. Please remember, punctuality and loyalty mean everything here." "I understand, Ma," Liz replied, polite and calm. As Liz walked away, Necker's smile dropped. "We'll see how long you last," she muttered. 2 weeks later, Liz's quiet diligence was already turning heads. Her reports were neat, her numbers accurate, her attitude humble. Colleagues respected her, though some whispered behind her back that she was too serious. One afternoon, while she typed in her small cubicle, a senior manager stopped by. "Good job, Liz. The chairman likes your accuracy." "The chairman?" she asked. "Yes, Mr. Cosmos Ballea himself." Liz's eyes widened. She had never met him. She only heard the sound of his footsteps when he visited the top floor. Quiet, firm, and intimidating. From his office upstairs, Cosmos reviewed her department's reports that evening. He paused on one document, perfectly structured, signed at the bottom, prepared by Liz. He read the lines again, precise, clear, no errors. A faint flicker of interest crossed his face. "Who prepared this?" he asked his assistant. "New accountant, sir." Miss Liz Cosmos nodded once and closed the file. "Efficient," he murmured, setting it aside. He didn't know it yet, but the woman behind those numbers would soon bring color back to a world he thought was forever gray. The morning began like any other, bright, busy, and already burning with heat before 8 a.m. Lagos moved fast, horns blaring, vendors shouting breakfast prices. Liz hurried down the sidewalk, her brown folder pressed to her chest, a small purse swinging at her side. She checked her wristwatch. 7:45. If the traffic stayed calm, she would reach the office by 8. But halfway to the junction, she noticed a man sitting by the roadside, his eyes clouded white. A tin bowl rested near his feet, empty except for a few coins. The world moved around him, uncaring. Liz slowed. Something in her heart squeezed. She looked at her watch again. 7:46. She could still make it if she hurried, but the man's head tilted upward, as if sensing her pause. "Madam," he said softly, "please help me buy small food. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Her throat tightened. She glanced at the buka nearby, where smoke rose from a blackened pot. "Wait here," she said gently. She dashed across the street, bought a plate of rice and beans, and returned. Kneeling beside him, she opened the plate, fanning away the steam. "It's still hot," she said. "Eat slowly." The blind man smiled faintly, his eyes searching the air. "Thank you, my daughter. God bless you. Amen," she whispered. When she stood again, the clock on her phone read 7:58. Her stomach dropped. She hurried off, weaving through the crowd, heart racing as buses hissed past. She arrived at the company gate at exactly 8:07. The security guard, a kind man named Musa, greeted her. "Morning, Madam Accountant." "Morning, Musa." She smiled breathlessly and ran to the elevator. On the third floor, Mrs. Necker stood near the entrance with her tablet, arms crossed. Her sharp perfume hit before her words did. "Miss Liz," she said coldly, "look at the time." "I'm sorry, Ma. I was—" "No excuses," Necker cut in. "You're late. It's just 7 minutes, Ma. And 7 minutes means you think you're special. You think the rules don't apply to you?" Liz's voice trembled, but stayed calm. "Please, Ma. I was helping a—" "Enough!" Necker's tone cracked like glass. "Gross misconduct and lateness. Hand over your ID card." Heads turned across the office. The air stiffened. Liz blinked, stunned. "Ma, please, at least let me explain." "I don't need explanations. I need discipline. You're fired." The words dropped heavy and final. For a moment, Liz just stood there, her folder limp in her hands. Around her, keyboards clicked softly, people pretending not to watch. She swallowed hard, forced her shoulders straight, and said quietly, "Thank you for the opportunity." Then she turned and walked away. Outside, the sky had grown harshly bright. The noise of traffic roared louder than usual. Liz walked aimlessly for a while, not trusting her legs to know where to go. She stopped at a small kiosk and sat on a bench, her eyes glassy but dry. Her phone buzzed, a message from her landlord reminding her of rent. She exhaled slowly, pressing the phone against her chest. God, is this how good deeds end? A gentle wind brushed her face, as if answering, "No, not yet." Hours later, inside Cosmos Ballea's office, the atmosphere was different. The chairman's seat was empty. He was away in South Africa for a business summit. Without his presence, the company felt looser, less watched. Mrs. Necker signed forms quickly, her smile tight as she sent out an internal memo announcing Liz's dismissal. "Problem solved," she whispered, pleased. She didn't know that fate had already written a counter-memo waiting for her boss's return. That evening, Liz returned home quietly. Her neighbor's children were playing in the corridor, their laughter echoing through the compound. She smiled faintly and slipped into her room. Her desk still held the framed photo of her father. She touched the edge and murmured, "Papa, I did what you'd do. You always said, kindness first." She removed her ID card from her neck and placed it beside the photo. Her hands shook slightly. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain. Liz sat by the window watching the sky darken. The city lights flickered on, one by one, each one a small survival story. Somewhere across the ocean, Cosmos checked his watch, unaware that the best employee he'd ever had no longer worked for him. And somewhere in the same city, a blind man finished his meal and whispered another prayer for the stranger who had fed him. The clouds gathered, heavy and full. The rain began to fall. The private jet touched down just as dawn broke over Lagos. Pale light washed across the runway, gold and quiet. Cosmos Ballea stepped out in a crisp suit, eyes heavy from travel, but mind already racing with work. He had spent 2 weeks abroad, sealing a deal that most men would celebrate. For him, success no longer felt like victory, only relief that things hadn't fallen apart. His driver opened the car door. Cosmos slid in, closed his eyes briefly, and exhaled. "Take me straight to the office." As the car sped through the city, he stared out the tinted glass. Lagos looked different at that hour, calmer, almost forgiving. He wondered if anyone ever noticed how beautiful it could be when the noise paused. Then, as always, he buried the thought. Feelings had no place in business. When he entered Cosmos Holdings, the building came alive instantly. Phones ringing louder, footsteps quicker, employees whispering, "The chairman is back." His assistant Ada hurried behind him, files pressed to her chest. "Welcome back, sir. We finalized the audits from last week." "Good. Leave them on my desk," he said, not slowing down. He entered his office. The same high ceilings, same glass walls, same view of the city. Everything looked perfect. And yet, something felt off. He sat, opened the first report, and frowned. Figures didn't add up. He turned the page, more errors. A signature he didn't recognize. He pressed the intercom. "Ada, who prepared these?" She hesitated. "The new accountant, sir." "New accountant?" His brows tightened. "Where's Liz?" There was silence. Then a careful reply. "Sir, Miss Liz was dismissed last week." Cosmos looked up slowly. "Dismissed? By who?" "HR, sir. Mrs. Necker said it was due to lateness and misconduct." He leaned back, jaw tightening. "Without my authorization?" "Yes, sir." The notice was circulated internally. Cosmos closed the file with a sharp snap. "Tell Mrs. Necker to see me." Now, minutes later, the HR manager entered, heels clacking nervously. Her smile was polite, but her voice carried a tremor. "Welcome back, sir. I hope your trip was successful." "Spare me the pleasantries," Cosmos said coldly. "Why was one of my best accountants fired without my knowledge?" Nika blinked. "Sir, she was constantly late." "Don't lie to me," he interrupted. "Every report with her name on it was flawless. You fired her for being late once. She displayed gross misconduct." "What misconduct?" She argued with me, sir." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "So she defended herself, and you call that misconduct?" Necker's voice dropped. "Sir, it was a necessary decision." Cosmos rose from his chair, his tone low but cutting. "You don't make necessary decisions without me. This company is built on structure, not ego. I want her back in this office tomorrow morning. If she doesn't resume, you'll hand in your own resignation letter instead." Necker's lips parted, stunned. "Yes, sir. Get out." She hurried out, heels clicking like broken rhythm. When the door closed, Cosmos sat again, staring at the reports scattered across his desk. The anger slowly faded into something he didn't understand. Guilt, maybe, or concern. He thought of the name Liz. He had never even seen her face properly. Yet something about her dedication had stayed with him. He opened his drawer and pulled out an old report she'd prepared. Neat handwriting, perfect alignment. He traced her name with his finger. Lateness and misconduct, he thought. That doesn't fit this kind of work. He pressed the intercom again. "Ada, find her contact address from her employment form." "Right away, sir." That night, he couldn't sleep. The storm outside matched the one in his head. Every time he closed his eyes, the thought returned. A woman fired unfairly because someone wanted power. He got up, poured himself a glass of water, and walked to the window. Rain streamed down the glass like threads of guilt. Somewhere in the city, she was probably wondering why kindness always seemed to cost her everything. For reasons he couldn't explain, that thought hit him harder than any business loss ever had. The next morning, before sunrise, Cosmos was already in his car. Ada had placed a slip of paper on his dashboard, Liz's home address. He drove himself this time, through narrow streets, across puddles, past vendors just setting up for the day. When he reached the area, he stopped by a small bus stop and rolled down the window. "Good morning," he called to a woman selling bread. I'm looking for someone named Liz. The woman smiled warmly. Ah, we know her. She's a nice lady, lives just behind the park. That small street there. Cosmos nodded. Thank you. As he drove toward the park, he didn't know what he expected to find, but deep inside, he knew he had to see her, not just to fix a mistake, but because something in him had started to stir again, something human. The morning sun rose pale and soft over the old park behind the motor terminal. Dew still clung to the grass, and the scent of roasted corn and early traffic filled the air. Cosmos Ballea parked his black SUV a few meters away and sat still for a moment, his hand resting on the steering wheel. He had followed the directions the bread seller gave him. Behind the park, sir, you'll see a small road that leads to some houses. He hadn't told his driver. He wanted to do this himself. For reasons he couldn't name, this didn't feel like a business errand. It felt personal. As he stepped out, the sunlight caught the dust rising from the road. The sounds of the city softened. Just children laughing in the distance, a vendor arranging loaves of bread, the faint hum of morning radios. He walked slowly along the small path that wound past a row of modest homes. Then he saw her. Liz. She was sitting under a large mango tree, beside an elderly woman in a wheelchair. Her blouse was simple, sleeves rolled up. A plate of food sat in her hands as she fed the woman gently, one spoon at a time, speaking softly so the woman wouldn't feel ashamed. Cosmos stopped. For a long moment, he couldn't move. The world around him seemed to blur. The noise, the dust, everything fading until all he could see was her quiet kindness. There was no camera, no audience, no reason for her to be this tender. It was just who she was. The woman in the wheelchair smiled between bites, touching Liz's hand lightly. Liz laughed softly, a sound so light, so genuine, it struck something deep in him he thought had died. He took a few steps closer, his shoes crunching the gravel. She turned, startled at first, then composed herself quickly when she recognized him. "Sir," she said, voice small but steady. Cosmos stopped beside her, the morning light catching on his sleeve. "Good morning." "Good morning, sir," she replied, still uncertain. He looked at the woman beside her. "You're helping her?" Liz nodded. "She stays down the street. Her children work far away. I bring her breakfast sometimes." He looked down briefly, then back at her. "You didn't deserve what happened." She lowered her eyes. "It's all right, sir." "No," he said quietly. "It's not." A silence passed between them, not awkward, but heavy with the kind of understanding words couldn't carry. Cosmos inhaled deeply, his voice softening. "You're a good worker, Liz. The best I've seen in a long time. I made a mistake letting someone else decide your worth." Her eyes flickered, disbelief, gratitude, confusion, all blending. "Please resume work tomorrow," he said. "Same position, same office." She hesitated. "After all that happened?" "Yes," he said simply, "after everything." The old woman in the wheelchair smiled. "Ah, see how God works," she murmured. Liz and Cosmos both turned slightly toward her, sharing an involuntary smile. For a second, the world felt still. A wealthy man who had forgotten how to feel, and a woman who had lost everything for kindness, standing in the same morning light, bound by something neither could explain. "Thank you, sir," Liz said softly. He nodded. "And Liz," she met his eyes. "Never apologize for being who you are," he said. "This world needs more people like you, not less." She swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you." He turned and walked back to his car, but his steps were slower now. As he reached for the door handle, He looked back once more. She was still there, helping the woman finish her meal, her laughter drifting faintly through the air. He stood for a moment, staring, before getting into the car. His reflection caught his own faint smile in the rearview mirror, the first real one in years. Driving away, he felt something loosen inside him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity, it was peace. Fragile but real, blooming quietly like dawn after a long night. That evening, Liz sat by her window, thinking of what had happened. She hadn't expected mercy, yet she'd seen it in his eyes. Not pride, not pity, but genuine respect. She whispered a prayer under her breath. God, thank you for justice that came wrapped in kindness. And across the city, in a mansion filled with silence, Cosmos stood at his window again. But this time, when he looked at the lights of Lagos, he didn't feel empty. Somewhere out there, goodness still existed, and for the first time, he wanted to protect it. The next morning arrived bright and alive, sunlight pouring through the glass doors of Cosmos Holdings. Staff hurried about, adjusting their clothes, whispering nervously. Everyone had heard the rumor. The chairman personally brought back the lady HR fired. When Liz stepped into the building, heads turned. She walked quietly through the corridor, her simple dress glowing in the morning light. Her ID card hung freshly restored around her neck. Musa, the security guard, grinned widely. "Ah, Madam Accountant." "You don't come back?" Liz smiled. "Yes, Musa. God is good." "God too much," he said, laughing. She stepped into her office. Her desk was just as she left it, though the air felt lighter now. Her colleagues greeted her warmly, some out of guilt, others out of genuine respect. She greeted them back with her usual calm smile and began to sort through files. It felt good to belong again. Later that afternoon, she was summoned to the chairman's office. Cosmos sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes calm but sharp. He gestured for her to sit. "How does it feel to be back?" he asked. Liz smiled politely. "Strange. But good, sir," he nodded slowly. "I reviewed your reports again last night. You were right. The books didn't add up. I asked for an internal audit." Her brows lifted. "You did?" "Yes. And it confirmed what I suspected. There's been a quiet theft running through the HR department for months." Liz's face tightened. "Mrs. Necker." He nodded. "She manipulated expense forms and erased traces using junior staff IDs. The audit revealed she had reason to push you out. You were too observant." Liz took a slow breath. "I noticed discrepancies. I wanted to report them, but she fired me before I could." "I know," Cosmos said softly, "and I'm sorry you had to go through that." Silence settled, thick but peaceful. Then he added, "She's been dismissed." "Permanently?" Liz nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Thank you, sir." Cosmos leaned back, studying her for a moment. "You didn't deserve what happened, Liz. You were punished for something that should have been rewarded." She lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "Sometimes, doing the right thing feels like a losing game." "Maybe," he said, "until someone notices." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the busy city outside felt distant, just two souls in quiet understanding. Weeks passed. Liz's name began to carry weight within the company. Her honesty brought new trust, her calm steadiness, new order. Employees started using her name as a standard. "Check it well, you know Liz won't approve errors." And through those days, something unspoken began to grow between her and Cosmos. He started visiting her department more often than necessary, pretending to check reports, but really just listening to her speak. She noticed the small things, the way he softened when she smiled, the way he said thank you more often now. One evening, When most of the staff had gone, Liz was still at her desk, finalizing a report. Cosmos stopped by the doorway. "You're still here?" She looked up and smiled faintly. "Almost done, sir." He walked in slowly, hands in his pockets. "You work too hard." She laughed quietly. "I learned from the best." He smiled, a real one this time. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "Before you came, this place was just walls and numbers. You reminded me it could have a heartbeat, too." Liz blinked, unsure how to respond. The air between them shifted. Gentle, genuine. "Sir," she began. "Cosmos," he said quietly. "Just Cosmos." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Thank you, Cosmos." They stood there in the warm evening light, words fading into the quiet understanding of what both already knew. Months later, news spread quietly through the company. The chairman had married his most trusted employee. The wedding was simple, graceful, held in a small garden, surrounded by friends, staff, and the quiet blessings of those who had witnessed their story unfold. Years passed, and Liz Ballea became the managing director of the company. Under her care, new branches opened across states and abroad. Together, she and Cosmos built not just a business, but a foundation that funded schools and shelters for the elderly and disabled, a tribute to the woman behind the park and the blind man whose hunger changed her fate. Their home was filled with warmth and laughter. Two little girls ran through the halls, their laughter echoing like music. And on quiet evenings, Liz still told them stories, not fairy tales, but lessons about kindness, courage, and grace. Sometimes, Cosmos would watch her from the balcony, the same way he once watched the city. Only now, he didn't see emptiness. He saw meaning. She had given him something he didn't know he was missing, a reason to feel again. And she, who once lost everything for feeding a stranger, had found in him the reward her kindness had always deserved. She stopped for a blind man and lost her job, but gained a love that could finally see her heart.